So, good morning, everybody, and welcome again. Also, all the peoples on Zoom, and I see there are this time a lot more. 16, great. Wow, welcome. Hope you enjoy. So, today I want to give an introduction about the fascicle Shishobo out of the Shobogenzo, the Bodhisattva's 4 embracing actions. In Japanese, it's called Bodaisatta Shishobo. And the 4 embracing actions are offering, loving words, beneficial action, and identity action. And I think you know already them. Hojo-san says in his commentary, this action should be done with awakening to the true reality of emptiness and mutual conditionality. In Dogen's teachings, Zazen practice alone is awakening and wisdom. And the 4 actions are how Zazen works in our daily lives and in relationship to other people and living beings. My first teacher in our lineage, Kaiko Robbie, wrote in her article, The Bodhisattva Heart in Boundless Vows, Endless Practice, that we are all bodhisattvas. I believe that too, but I believe, as Hojo-san likes to say, that we are all baby bodhisattvas at first. What is a bodhisattva? The term is originally Sanskrit and it means enlightened being. In his previous lives, Buddha was a bodhisattva, a person who is seeking to attain enlightenment. A Buddha is someone who has already attained enlightenment. There are many bodhisattvas who could be Buddhas, but don't enter nirvana, but remain in the real world. In the Diamond Sutra, it says, and if not the uncountable, immeasurable, infinite number of all beings are liberated, we don't think that even one being is liberated. The bodhisattvas are symbols of a certain virtues of the Buddha, and there are 3 great bodhisattvas in Mahayana. They are transformations of Buddha. Manjushri, Munsho, Bosatsu in Japanese, Avalokiteshvara, in Japanese Kanzeon Bosatsu or Kanchisai Bosatsu, and Ksitagarbha, in Japanese Jitsu Bosatsu. There are a lot more bodhisattvas. You can find a lot of lists. And in my lectures, I will also talk about another great bodhisattva, Vimalakirti, who is very important for me. Like here, but a little different, we don't have in Vienna a sodo or sendo only for sitting zazen and a hatto only for liturgy. We have only one room, like a rectangle, and so we have an all-in-one altar, but with very special statues I found in Chinese internet store. Usually there is only Manchushro in a sendo. Normally, oh, he's here. Great. You can see, yeah, and because when we're sitting zazen, the practitioners are representing Buddha. On our altar in Vienna, there is a Manjushri sitting on a lion, also Samantabhadra, the Bodhisattva of shining practice, who is often represented on an elephant, also on our altar, but both figures look like Avalokiteshvara. And so we have all 3 with us on the altar. To learn more about bodhisattvas, I want to recommend the book Faces of Compassion, Classic Bodhisattva Archetypes and Their Modern Expressions by Dogen Layton. And at the beginning he says, the heroic benefactors. Bodhisattvas are beings who are dedicated to the universal awakening or enlightenment of everyone. They exist as guides and providers of Sangha to suffering beings and offer everyone an approach to meaningful spiritual life. And oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. It's Yeah, yeah, sorry, it's dropping down a little bit. So, yeah, sure. I hope now it's better. So, everything was on. Yeah, good. Thank you. Okay, and later, Dogen then Leighton says, the word bodhisattva comes from the Sanskrit roots bodhi, meaning awakening or enlightenment, and sattva, meaning sentient being. Sattva also has the etymological roots that include intention, meaning the intention to awaken, and courage or heroism, referring to the resolution and strength involved in this path. Dogen then Leighton sees the bodhisattvas as the heroic ideal of Mahayana, as archetypes, and archetypes are crystallizations of components of the psyche and catalysts to self-understanding. A term shaped by the Swiss psychiatrist and developer of analytic psychology, C.G. Jung. Maybe you know them. They describe universal primary images or primordial figures that are associated with certain emotion characteristics and goals. My former Sangha from Bekaroshi was located at the Black Forest in Germany. And it was an old building formerly used by the group of Graf Dürkheim. Maybe somebody here knows him. He was one of the first well-known Zen practitioners in Germany. And the center was Sodo and Hatto together, like in Vienna, one rectangle. And left side of the Buddha altar was the Avalokiteshvara shrine with a real wonderful Avalokiteshvara figure. And this posture sitting and one foot tightened and the other going to the ground so that she can always stand up quickly to help somebody. In one of my first sessions, I sat direct in front of this Avalokiteshvara. The session were San Francisco Zen Center style with 12 periods of Zazen, 30 or 40 minutes, and always 7 days. So not easy at all. And in these 7 days, something happened, something opened to my understanding of Canon. It was a bodily experience, not easy to explain, but this bodily experience opened a gate or an energetic blockade, dissolved. I will talk more about when I come to the Irvijnana in one of my next talks. And since then, my way of hearing has changed. It is really hard to talk about, but it was a shift in my practice. And so was Avalokiteshvara, or Kanon, or Kanzeon in Japanese, the first archetype that becomes very important for me. In the 25th chapter of the Lotus Sutra, at the end is said, the one who hears the cries of the world, Avalokiteshvara, pure and holy, is able to help those in suffering, distress, death, and danger, to be an immutable refuge, perfect in all merits. He looks with compassionate eyes at the living beings. The quantity of his blissful benefits is immeasurable like the sea. Therefore, one must adore him by bowing the top of his head to the ground. The 25th chapter of the Lotus Sutra is about the Bodhisattva Sariputta and its 33 transformations up to the canon. The number 33 is a sacred number that already occurs in the Vedic scriptures in India, and there it indicates the possible number of all gods. There are also some Buddhist scriptures in which 33 deities appear on Mount Sumeru. The unimaginably high Mount Sumeru is the abode of gods and the guardian deities, rising in the center of the universe. Around it revolves the sun and the moon, the stars and the planets, which influence the course of day and night, the coming and going of the seasons, and thus ultimately the well-being of mankind. The Mount Sumeru is also called the King of Mountains and appears in a lot of sutra, like in the Vimalakirti Sutra too. The worship of Avalokiteshvara becomes very important in Japanese Buddhism. For example, in the 12th century, a pilgrimage route with 33 temples was built. These 33 manifestations of Avalokiteshvara of the 25th chapter of the Lotus Sutra were reduced into iconography in the Japanese Buddhism, mostly to 6 representations. In the Tendai school, each of the 6 has the task of saving the beings in one of the 6 worlds. The statue that sat in front of me in the sesshin is not included in these 6 forms. This form is iconographic canon representation. It is used in China and it is called Water Moon Guanyin. Guanyin is the Chinese word for Avalokiteshvara, and this has its origin in the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Flower Garland Sutra, or the Great Vast Buddha Flower Adornment Sutra. In one chapter, the boy Sudana visited 53 wise teachers, and the 28th is Avalokiteshvara, Guanyin in Chinese, at his island home Bodaisatta. He is accompanied and guided by Bodhisattva Maitreya, the next Buddha. Maitreya said, "Good son, south of here there is a mountain named Bodaisatta. There is a Bodhisattva named Guanchisai. Go there and ask the Bodhisattva how to learn the Bodhisattva action, how to practice the Bodhisattva way. Now, householder, I therefore will point it out for you." Then he says the verse. "Above the sea, there is a mountain made of a multitude of perfected treasures. Sages dwell there pure and clean. Spring flow and wind around like majestic ornaments. Flowers, woods, fruits, and trees are opulent between them. The bravest and most courageous, the one benefiting to all living creatures, Guanchisai, is dwelling there. Should you ask for the Buddha's merit, it is there where he will broadly expound on it for you." After hearing this, the boy Sudana respectfully leaves from Vestila and travels to Guanyin's mountain abode. Then he arrives at the mountain. He prays and looks for the great Bodhisattva everywhere. Within a ravine beneath the western cliff, he sees flowing springs winding around and glistening, trees and woods growing thickly and bushy, fragrant weeds soft and tender. All this is winding around and spread out in this place, all sorts of honorable adornments and majestic ornaments extending on all sides. The Bodhisattva Guanchisai is sitting atop a pure and clean diamond treasure leaf stone in a lotus pose. Numerous bodhisattvas are sitting on treasure stones, circling him in veneration. He is proclaiming and speaking the perfect wisdom of the bright and shining law of great compassion and pity. And from this story comes the name of the statue I set in front, the Water Moon Guanyin. This comes from the Sanskrit word Udaka Chandra, and this refers to moon reflected in water, an expression that is often used for the emptiness of all dharmas they accompanying the bodhisattvas. This expression is often used as metaphor for enlightenment. Mount Bodaisatta, Avalokiteshvara's Pure Land, was originally thought to be located on an island somewhere south of India. By the Ming dynasty, this mystical paradise had been identified with Mount Butuyu, an island off the east coast of China, and had become an important pilgrimage site, especially for the Pure Land Buddhism. This statue and archetype it represents is very important to me. For example, our Viennese Sangha logo is drawing of it, and our Sangha is called Daijihi, the old Japanese expression for boundless compassion. For this stands Avalokiteshvara, and I brought a postcard of our Sangha with, maybe after you can see it a little bit in detail. This made by a friend of us in Vienna. So for further understanding of Avalokiteshvara, I recommend the 6th article by Hojo-san about Kanon in Shobogenzo in the Sotosho magazine Dharma Eye. About the second important Bodhisattva, Manjushri, you will hear a little bit more later, and I will talk more in my following lectures. Now the third Bodhisattva. He influenced me a lot too. It is Ksitagarbha, or in Japanese, Jitsu, means earthworm or treasure of storehouse. He took a vow to save all beings who wander in the 6 realms of samsara in the time between Shakyamuni Buddha and Maitreya Buddha. He is a protector in many levels, especially for the unborn beings, children, travelers, but also for the prison inmates. In Japan, at the entrance of many cemeteries, Jitsus stand to save the people who will be reborn in one of the 6 worlds, because he is the guide to our afterlives. Iconographically, he is presented with a Chintamani, translated as the wish-fulfilling jewel, in one of his hands. The Chintamani is also often compared to the Philosopher's Stone, very mystical and also often associated with a wind horse, a mystical being that understands the language of the wind. Chintamanis are seen on many tankas in Tibet, lined up in front of Buddha. It is said that Chintamani is the expression of reaching wisdom of a Buddha. It enables us to understand the truth of the Buddha. It is also often pictured as a shining pearl. In the other hand, he holds the monk's staff, a symbol of the vows. For me, is this guardian also a visualization or manifestation of our universal self, that we are connected to everything and that the world presents itself and functions in a completely different way than we are used to in reality. Things are moving in a completely different way than we think in our everyday being. This has little to do with supernaturalism, but rather with the fact that there is a second truth. There is a perfect world far away from our everyday thinking in our materialistic world. Bodhisattvas also exist in Theravada. However, Theravada primarily teaches to attainment of enlightenment, awakening, through one's own effort. This ideal of Theravada is to become an arhat, the saint, who attains liberation and thus breaks the cycle of reincarnations, unlike in Mahayana, as I discussed earlier with the quotation from the Diamond Sutra. The only bodhisattvas known in Theravada are the historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, before he became a Buddha, and the coming Buddha Maitreya, says Wikipedia. But you know, Wikipedia is not the whole truth. My Dharma friend Santa Chita, a Theravada nun from Austria who lives in California, now with a very wonderful new project where she tries to bring Dharma, ecology, and art together, says, for most practitioners, it is sure that the goal of practice is to get out of samsara, but there is a second way to perfect all parameters completely on the Bodhisattva way up to Buddha. Now we come to the 4 embracing actions. In this fascicle, Dogen teaches us the 4 actions are the essence of all Bodhisattva practice to guide us to live in peace and harmony. Hojo-san, in his commentary on the Shishobo, explained in great detail what Dogen might have meant. If anyone hasn't read it yet, we will be happy to provide it. Please ask us after the talk. The 4 embracing actions are not an invention of the Mahayana, but occur in very early scriptures. They are described in the 4th and 8th book of the Anguttara Nikaya, a part of the Pali Canon. There, they are still seen as the 4 teachings of grace, which are about bringing the Buddha's teachings closer to sentient beings and winning them over to it. None of the 4 embracing actions can exist or be performed separately. All 4 are interdependent. Giving is probably the most important virtue in this. Dana can show itself in so many actions, such as giving time or intention, or in a simple way to sit zazen. Giving is also mostly connected with loving words. Not in zazen, but maybe to yourself to get on the cushion. And both together become a beneficial action, which is impossible to perform without identity action. As you have heard in my first talk, beneficial action is very important for me. And today, often it goes hand in hand with the term engaged Buddhism. And this has taken many different forms today, and I will talk about this in my last talk in June. There are different translations of Shishobo, and Hojo-san's translations of the 4 embracing actions goes back to a commentary of Menzan, a very important reformer of Soto Zen. Nishijima translated it as the 4 kinds of social acting as a bodhisattva, and like Hosan El-Zenok mentioned, there are such translations as foundations for social unity, ways of showing favor, 4 methods of guidance, and 4 integrative methods. The new former abbot of Antaiji, Muho, a German guy, sees it as everyday love practice. He explains in great detail using the 4 Brahmaviharas, the 4 immeasurable attitudes of mind, which he says Dogen also uses this as the basis for the Shishobo fascicle. The 4 Brahmaviharas are loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. In principle, I think the term love is very difficult because it is associated with such a big concept and can lead to many misunderstandings. In my interfaith practice with chaplains of other religions, especially the Christian religions, I often discuss this because almost only they use the term love. But in today's world, it is so connotated and limited to romantic love that the universe connection of love with all living beings is no longer seen. Compassion is for me the more appropriate expression here. And to gain compassion is one of the favorite goals in our practice. I like the translation from Hojo-san because embracing is a very important practice to develop compassion. And compassion is necessary to act in the 4 embracing actions: forgiving, loving words, beneficial action, and identity action. So, now to the first, giving. Dogen says, offering means not being greedy. Not to be greedy means not to covet. Not to covet commonly means not to flatter. Even if we rule the 4 continents, in order to offer teachings of the true way, we must simply and unfailingly not be greedy. It is like offering treasures we are about to discard to those we don't know. We give flowers blooming on the distant mountains of the Tathagata and offer treasures accumulated in past lives to living beings. Whether our gifts are dharma or material objects, each gift is truly endowed with the virtue of offering or dana. Even if this gift is not our personal possession, nothing hinders our practice of offering. No gift is too small, but our effort should be genuine. In general, we talk in Buddhism from 3 kinds of giving: giving materials, dharma, and fearlessness. This sounds all very easy, right? But no gift is too small, but our effort must be genuine. This is the real important issue here. We must be free of greed. As I told you last time, I had this experience when I served food to homeless, and despite the cold and hard work, went home completely exhilarated with the other helpers, and we had such great light-hearted joy. This was the first experience of how happy it can make you to help other people, to give without getting anything upwards in return. But still, you get something in return when you give without expectation. Hojo-san describes this in the opposite way with the takohatsu, when he begged and actually gave something as well. So giving and receiving doesn't exist independent. They are always together. So I experienced something similar again and again when I teach Dharma, give a talk, or often just talking about sitting posture. With the talks, I always receive insights already in the preparation, and then mostly through the questions. I still learn a lot. In the prison, I'm currently in charge of a group together with a therapist who also does Tai Chi, and we always do an hour of Tai Chi together at the beginning. Then we sit for about 30 minutes. I guide this, ensure this is not the Zen. And then I hold a small talk and answer questions. And every time when I come out of the prison, I'm just inspired and full of joy. Not only why I can get out again, also what I have experienced inside. So in this environment, it is so easy and clear to see what giving can give you. Because people like inmates get so little response in their lives in prison. Because, not to mention the great practice opportunity that walking into a prison gives you. The learning of patience and bearing, enduring, and penetrating one's own deep fears. And we are already at the third possibility of giving, fearlessness. Fearlessness does not mean that I don't have fear. It can still be present in the background, but it is in the background and I have damped it, like Manjushri, who sits on the lion and has damped the lion. For example, this week I sat down here in the morning in the Sendo, and after a few minutes a spider appeared and crawled in front of my eyes along the wall and come closer and closer to me. It was not big, but also not small in this kind. And I don't know what kind of spiders there are here and how poisonous they are. And you must know that I used to have extreme fear of spiders. But now the fear is dead. And I think in my fifth or sixth talk, I will talk in detail about how this works. The fearlessness of a bodhisattva is often associated with security, but this is misleading and can lead you in a trap. Security here is connected with the faith in the meaning of the great trust in the Dharma and not from predictability of the future. Ourself wants permanently to make our life predictable. Now comes the famous saber-toothed tiger in the savannah with high step grace, where he could not be seen, and so life could be over very quickly. We need predictability, otherwise we cannot exist. Just for opening a door or going down a staircase, it is important. But of course, we push it farther and want to make everything predictable. And in our digital age, this takes an enormous proportion. In our world, everything is more and more modeled and predicted by enormous computer models. But we know that the world is unpredictable and unstable and impermanent. We experience this constantly through our practice, and Hoko talks a lot about non-reliance. But in our mind, also these models have solidified, and these are getting feedback loops. Start like a program is run off by a trigger. Our practice aims are to break these loops. Manjushri, who is often shown also with a sword in his hands, has his sword to cut the stream of our consciousness to experience the true reality. Facing our fear is a great challenge that we can face again in Zazen, if we allow them to arise, or when a spider appears in front of your eyes. In doing so, we can always realize that we will not die. We will not lose any limbs or get deadly bitten, for example. But if we sit upright and open our hands of thinking, we will realize that we will remain intact and that our fears are only thought formations, usually accompanied by wild emotions. I believe that our fears are one of the main driving forces of our life. For me, is this like this. And in my research, I came across the 5 great fears that we know in Buddhism. The fear of losing one's existence, the fear of bad reputation, the fear of death, the fear of changing consciousness, the fear of speaking in front of groups. I know all of them. Just the last one now, speaking in front of groups. The fear of changing consciousness is also known to all of us, I think. When sitting, for example, when the sense of space changes or one simply sinks deeper in Zazen. And I think I don't need to explain more about the fear of death. And in German, there is a nice saying that often goes together with the first fear. Ist der Ruf erst ruiniert, lebt es sich ziemlich ungeniert. That means, once your reputation is ruined, you can live quite freely. So, with the great economic crisis in 2008, my family business had to declare bankruptcy. I sold mechanical engineering constructions at that time and was deeply affected by the crisis. When we then also had to declare private bankruptcy, and that was a tough exercise, also a big practice opportunity. I learned a lot. I gained a lot from it and fortunately had friends who advised me and coached me through it. To penetrate the fears does not mean that they disappear completely. It can happen, but they lose their energy and fade into the background, are no longer scary. First, we have to allow them, then accept that they are there, and then give them space and let them be. That's what I call penetrating. And then they dissolve. This practice is also called the 4 marks of Dharma. Just let them be and don't do anything with them. You will see that they disappear by themselves. And this form of serenity that arises from it inspires confidence and thus gives security. It is not false security that arises from predictions, which is often not true. So this is what fearlessness means to me. Now we come to the second embracing action, loving speech. And when I read this in Shobogenzo, I really must laugh because Dogen and loving speech is sometimes a paradox. Dogen says, loving speech means, first of all, to arouse a compassionate mind when meeting beings and to offer loving, caring words. In general, we should not use any violent or harmful words when we speak. Compassion is difficult to understand, but when we talk in Buddhism about compassion, we mean this ultimate nature of our existence, when we left all our self-centeredness behind. Then this is our true nature. We are compassionate in principle because we are all interconnected and dependent and need each other. The Sanskrit word karuna means to be with somebody to help him get free from bodily or mental suffering. Karuna is practiced to remove harm toward beings. We have to be aware how we translate karuna, and there are differences in German and English I want to mention. Compassion, as I understood this, is a reaction towards what we have perceived, a connection that is being made. Empathy is the ability to take the perspective of another, a kind of perception. Sympathy means that we can feel the feelings of another, and pity is we suffer with somebody. In German language, it is different because the word Mitgefühl for compassion we use as translation for Corona means to feel with somebody, like sympathy. But the roots are different, and we distinguish it from the German word Mitleid, means to suffer with somebody. So in German language, we distinguish Mitleid, pity. To suffer with somebody means also suffer with him. And Mitgefühl, compassion, to feel with somebody means I feel his suffering and I don't suffer myself. This is a very important distinction when we talk about compassion. I'm now it, but it isn't me, says Dogen in his enlightenment poem. I will talk more often about this quote because it says a lot about the experience of not grasping, not attach or rely on somebody or something. To be compassionate starts with ourselves. How we treat us in our inner dialogue. Are we compassionate with ourselves? It is always an important reminder for me to treat myself like I want to treat others. As I have already told you, I grew up very Catholic, which was very nice on the one hand because I was able to experience connectedness. But at the same time, in dealing with the moral norms, a sense of guilt was imposed on me that I still struggle with today. I'm talking about a huge topic here because I'm going to talk about shame and guilt, and this could fill many talks on its own. It's not really covered in Buddhist teachings, nor is there anything about it in Buddhist psychology, the Abhidharma. Only the sense of shame, hiri in Sanskrit, is treated as a mind factor at the same time as otopa of conscience. That's it. Guilt is the processing and further development of shame. Shame is a very natural feeling and arises when we feel not understood, not accepted. I would say not seen by our environment. We experience a kind of separateness. It arises mostly when we are not in accord with the social moral norm and we are told that we have acted wrongly. This happens to us already when we are small children, through gestures, eye contact, neglect, and so on. As soon a form of ego has been created. So about the 10th, 12th month of the toddler. Most of the time, we immediately relate this reaction of the other people to ourselves. I'm bad, evil, and this is the beginning of self-doubt and self-hatred. The inner judges start to work. It seems like that this was not always so, and it has developed differently in Eastern and Western cultures. In Western cultures, there is the story I have heard that this guilt has its origin in the Christian church only in the 12th century. That's when repentance was transferred from a feeling that is directed towards the community to a feeling that is directed only towards the ego in ritual. So from the absolute form to the relative form of repentance. Supposedly, this was done by Scottish monks. The Catholic Church took this to the extreme and invented the sale of indulgences. I can buy my way out of my guilt, my sins. It is an ingenious business model for me as a salesman. The demand never runs out. The original idea of inner liberation was lost in this process. I'll talk about repentance in detail in my next talk. In the Eastern yogic culture, the idea that guilt was transferred to the community remained longer. There is this funny story from the 60s, I think Bikaroshi told it, but I'm not sure. It was at one of the first interfaith meetings in the US with Buddhists, and the Dalai Lama had not been in the US very long. At some point, the topic of self-doubt came up and the interpreter translated it to Dalai Lama, and a long time went by in which the Dalai Lama talked to the interpreter all the time. At some point, the interpreter was asked, what is it about? The Dalai Lama didn't know the word. and there seemed to be no direct translation for it in Tibetan. I don't know if this is true, but this is how it was told. Nowadays, with globalization, this self-hatred is now present around the world because we human beings love to judge ourselves. In a way, we are addicted to this behavior of inner judges. I think the root of this behavior is that our individual self always needs affirmation, especially when we don't experience the basic faith in the world. And the lack of this basic faith is the beginning of doubt. My inner judges are still working today, but thanks to practice, I have learned on the one hand to notice them and cut them off with the sword of Manjushri and leave them behind. And on the other hand, practice also helps to establish this missing basic faith. To show compassion to oneself is the basis to show compassion to others. Loving words does not always mean that we just butter people up, but to help them means also to try to give them clarity. This is a difficult undertaking and requires great practice and the use of skillful means, because the truth is usually difficult to bear. However, it may also contain sharp words, as we see with Dogen again and again, and also Kodo Sawaki often helps me as an example of this. Now we come to beneficial action. Dogen says, beneficial action is simply creating skillful means to benefit living beings, whether they are noble or humble. For example, we care for the near and distant future of others and use skillful means to benefit them. We should take pity on a cornered tortoise and care for a sick sparrow. When we see this tortoise or sparrow, we try to help them without expecting any reward. We are motivated solely by beneficial action itself. There are so many ways to act beneficially. For example, as I said, Zazen is a beneficial action. Helping people not sit alone. Sitting in person with a group is so important. Sometimes people feel ashamed when I talk about my social engagement as a prison chaplain because they think they should do it too. But we have to act out from our own talents, how Dharma is arising with us. And these talents have a lot to do with our personal karma. This we bring in our life and for which we can do nothing. Beneficial action can show itself in many small everyday ways to make the world a better place, and we should always examine our motivation why we are doing this. I also started my social engagement in the beginning out of pure bad conscience to show everyone that I'm not such a bad person after all. But the experience of giving that I have described before in the giving part, this experience of pure bliss through giving has changed my motivation and led me to continue doing this. They clearly realized why I started to do this. I started it for myself. But that should not stop us from doing charitable acts, because only then we can experience how helpful they are for ourselves. In helping others, there is always this part that we also help ourselves through the permanent mutual connection, like I talked before. So, I have to become shortly to an end. And now we come to identity action. So, Dogen says, identity action means to be not different, neither different from self nor from others. For example, it is like the way that in the human world the Tathagata identifies himself with human beings. Because he identifies himself in the human world, we know that he must be the same in the other worlds. When we realize identity action, self and others are one suchness. Harps, poems, and wine make friends with people, with heavenly beings, and with spirits. People befriend harps, poems, and wine. There is a principle that harps, poems, and wine befriend harps, poems, and wine. that people make friends with people, that heavenly beings befriend heavenly beings, and that spirits befriend spirits. This is how we study identity action. Identity action is also called collaboration action, but here too, we can get caught in a trap. In this trap that we think we are good human beings when we collaborate with others. I like the word identity action so much, and I will use it in the other way around as the meaning of the kanji, some actions. But in order to identify with all us the same actions, to really understand and connect with others, we need to break down the walls we have built through our identity and get to the true ground of our connectedness. The network in which we are all connected to everything and everyone. Penetrating these walls of our own identity and thus expanding our own boundaries and opening ourselves to unlimited compassion for all beings is what we do as Bodhisattvas. For me, this means forgetting the self and dropping off body and mind, what Dogen Senshi talking about in Genjo Koan. Only when we have dropped our own identity, we can recognize our opposite. And this applies to all sentient and non-sentient beings as they really are. We can pick them up where they are and open a space for them where they can pour themselves in, because it is not filled with our own being. When we relate to the world in absolute connectedness and recognize the 5 skandhas as empty, then identity action is really possible. Then we can really study identity action, as Dogen says. And Dogen quotes later the Taoistic book Kanji. We should know in ourselves that because the ocean does not refuse to be the ocean, it can be the ocean and achieves greatness. Because mountains do not refuse to be mountains. They can be mountains and reach great heights. No more ideas and conceptions of the world hinder the relationship with the world. We step out of the illusion of our being. We collaborate with others on a level that has nothing to do with our believed identity. This is solidarity in a whole new way, a solidarity that steps out of our habitual thinking. I want to take you further on a journey over the next few weeks and show you how I'm trying to achieve this with my practice. Thank you. So if you have any questions, comments, and so on, please, and also from Zoom.
Anyone from Zoom? Any questions or comments?
So everybody understands everything? Perfect. Yes, please.
So you brought up the concept of archetypes, I'm guessing from Carl Jung.
Yeah.
One of those archetypes is the shadow, and I think you already sort of touched on this, where we generate this shame.
Yeah.
Could you speak more to the archetype of the shadow, its integration, and our practice?
Oh, thank you. It's not so easy. So because I'm not a fellow of CK Yang, yeah, but I can talk about our own darkness. And it seems that this is the expression we found in Buddhism for these archetypes, yeah, and it's the way to find through of all our self-centeredness to this ground where this shadow can get into light and our bodhicitta can arise. So this is I think this can be a explanation. Is this?
And I think that's not separate from your words about fear,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that shadow is a fearful thing.
Yeah,
There
absolutely.
are lots of things about ourselves that we don't want to see,
Yeah,
and that we don't want to acknowledge. We have a lot of suffering that we would just as soon ignore.
yeah. And we want to avoid suffering,
Of
you know,
course,
in
of
our
course.
well-being world that everything is so fine and happy. We want to avoid all these bad things, and they are not about me. No, this is not the right thing because I want to be happy. But the truth is we have to go in and penetrate them, and then they can dissolve. That's the thing what can happen in Sazen. Yeah? And we do nothing. Yeah? This is this wonderful practice, yeah, we have, yeah, and we are farming. This is the word what I heard this week. What is in my mind about, yeah, in.
I think it's also not separate from, you know, you said something interesting when you were talking about identity action. You said one of the important pieces of identity action is to understand this identity.
Yes.
You know, when we think about identity action, we think about, well, non-separation. My identity is not separate
Yes.
from those things around me, and that's half the story, right? And the other half is, what about this?
Genau.
So I think part of, I think this is not unconnected to digging into the shadow and looking
Yeah.
carefully and not
Yeah.
ignoring, because
Yeah.
it's part of this identity, which we need to fully understand if we're going to engage in the kind of
Yeah.
bodhisattva activity that
Absolutely
you're talking
right.
about.
Yeah, absolutely right. And to see our own darkness. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so when we really penetrate this darkness, the light can arise.
Mhm.
Yeah. And this light comes out of our bodhicitta, and we all, you know, we all are Buddhas. We don't know it, but most time we don't know it. Yeah. But with our practice, we can find a way that the light is coming through this shadow and maybe is burning them away. And sure, this shadow always exists, you know. When there is light, there is a shadow. So, but how we relate to this shadow can change. Jill, you?
I just want to thank you for, when talking about the bodhisattvas, that you mentioned Jizo Bodhisattva, because I think that as human beings we always tend to be self-centered about human beings and helping human beings, and Jizo Bodhisattva is caring for beings in all six realms, and so reminds of
Yeah.
the interdependence with all the other creatures, may we see them or not.
Absolutely, yes. Yes. For me, he is also really very important, and he is, a statue is on the entrance. Hoko has seen it, she has the same.
I think the same way.
Yes, thank you.
On the subject of Carl Jung and Buddhism, there's a very good bridge. The first translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead was Evan Wood's translation, and Carl Jung writes a commentary in it. And so you can read Carl Jung's own thinking on the subject with respect to Carl Jung's idea of the shadow. And so in Tibetan Buddhism, the deity forms are defined as a personification of certain antecedent energies within the psyche. So Carl Jung gets that definition of an archetype directly from the Tibetan Buddhist system. And in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the bodhisattvas have the two forms. They're benevolent, kind-hearted, gentle, motherly, hug you, everything's going to be all right form. But then there are the wrathful deities, where if you're so fixated on your egocentricity, then there's the tough love aspect of the bodhisattvas that come in forms that look like demons, dark. It deals more with darker energies, and the Tibetan system, rather than trying to push those things away, because that's our impulse when we have negativity, when there's fear or hate or anything like that, we want to push it away, we want to push it into the unconscious, we want to be in denial. But the Tibetan system, you go right into that energy, into that dark energy, and you don't push it away, you bring it into yourself, and you sit with it, and you process it, and you integrate it into the totality of your being. So that's a major component of the tantric system of Buddhism.
Yes, it is. And there is, this is, for me, often it is a little bit of lack in Zen Buddhism, because there are no methods or there are no ways to transform it in a very special way. Yeah. This was at the beginning of my practice. I read a lot of books, for example, from Pema Chodron. There is one book from her, Dogen, Go There Where Your Fear Is, for example. Yeah? And this helps me a lot, also Tonglen, but I tried it and it doesn't really work, you know. It doesn't really work. There is a funny story. I practice this really a lot, and you know, I'm a salesman. I'm driving a lot of miles a year, and I'm driving fast cars and modern cars. And I was driving through a partner very far away in Czech Republic, and it was on the Slovakian highway, so there is no limit, and I pushed my car as fast as it can, yeah. And and I go out of the city of Vienna first, and I was very mindful, and I was in this Tonglen to give everything what comes to me in this traffic situation and get it back in a right way. And then I was on the highway, and in this fast driving, there was a very old Slovakian Skoda, yeah, and he goes on the left side, yeah, and he was very slow. So, and I have really, it was like, yeah, but you know, my modern car was no problem. So, and then I drive. He goes back to the right side, and I take a look on him, and I made this Tonglen thing, yeah. And in this moment, I experienced his fear. His fear was a kind of he will die soon, yeah. And so this was my experience that this is not really the real world. So I have to transform it before in myself. And in Sazen, this works by themselves. Yeah.
I'm going to guess that not everybody here knows what Tonglen is. Do you want to elaborate on that?
It's a long time ago, and there is a book from Norman Fischer, maybe somebody knows this, where he tries to talk about that. Oh, my microphone, sorry. To talk about there is no way to deal with our emotions in Zen, and he wants to bring up the Dogen system. So the brief way is that we inhale, and in the inhaling of all also the bad experiences we have, we inhale it and try to transform it and exhale in a transformed good way. Yeah. So in my next talk I will talk about Naidan. Yeah. And this is an old Taoistic tradition in doing this transformation in our body, transformation of energies in our body. And this is also about Ziggy Yang, because he was also interested in these Taoistic methods. Yeah, but he has a very old translation from Wagner. It was I think a Swiss psychologist also, I don't know exactly, but you can see in this translation the Catholic tradition a lot, yeah, so like the most translations from Eastern cultures at the beginning of the 20th century, yeah, and so he is misleading a few things. But in my next talk I will talk a little bit more about Naidan, about this possibility of transformation that I found, yeah, in a way to deal with emotion, these strong emotions. You have to know I come very late to Buddhism, so I don't know. I was interested in a lot of different things, but yeah, and you will hear that all ends in Sazen. Okay.
Yeah, I might just quickly add on Tonglen. So the impulse, according to the three poisons, is that things we love we want to cling on to,
Yeah.
keep to ourselves, and things we do not like we want to push away. And so the Tonglen reverses that.
Mm.
So if there's something that you want to keep, you should offer it as a gift to another. And if there's something you want to push away, you should own it and bring it into yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Are there any questions from Zoom?
Oh, there is a hand. In Vienna.
Ha! Hello to Vienna.
Hi, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good.
Could you?
So I wanted to ask something about pity and about shame. You talked about both concepts, and when you talked about them, I realized that they often go together, especially in advertising. Like you often see billboards of, starving children in Africa, and then you feel bad about it and you feel ashamed about it, and that moves you to donate something.
Yeah.
So so during your talk, I got an idea why that is so, but if it's because before I talk about it, I would like to hear your explanation. How do the two go together, pity and shame? And this is not the kind of compassion that we as Buddhists want to cultivate.
Absolutely.
I assume.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
so how
Okay.
can we go about this when we come in this situation?
Yeah, modern marketing is made by a lot of psychologists, and they know exactly how human beings act. Yeah, and I think this is like I talked that we love to judge us, and we are addicted in a way to this shame feelings and the way I found in practice is the way of Manjushri. To cut with the sword of Manjushri, this stream of our consciousness, that what we think this is our life, this is our being. And to cut this in really very thin slices, yeah. And when you are aware of this, that your mind is only a construction of yourself, and you don't have to really identify with this, then you can cut this and see this is only a construction made by marketing specialists. Yeah, they want to throw me into something. Yeah, and to this connection, yeah, is because we want to we want to be really good humans. This is our main motivation to be in the world. Yeah, in a way, we know this all. Everybody knows this. Deep in the ground, everybody knows this. Yeah, and this shame is in a kind also this feeling that we know this and we want to do something. And yeah, and modern psychology is helping marketing to raise money. It is okay?
It's okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Shall we close?
Yeah, sure.